It's that time of year. Record projections, playoff odds. We'll look into the crystal ball and maybe find something surprising next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, back to 5 one of these weeks in February, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, hosting this show for coming up on 6 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, or 3 days a week for now, every day, Monday through Friday, 10 months out of the year. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, the first thing that I want to get into is the release of the playoff odds / record predictions, or projections, I should say, over at FanGraphs. And this year they've kind of rolled things out a little bit differently in that they've featured, at least I haven't noticed this in the past, multiple different systems that have playoff odds. So it's not just like FanGraphs playoff odds. They have FanGraphs playoff odds, but they also have a different methodology that they use at FanGraphs, and then this projection system called ATC, which my understanding of ATC is that it's an average of like all kinds of different projection systems. And so it tends to be the best projection system in general for like players, because when you average all the different projections, it turns out to be like the best. And then there's something called the BAT-X, which is also really good and incorporates like StatCast data. And there's a new one called Oopsie, which, yeah, it's a funny sounding name, but it also incorporates StatCast data that hasn't really been incorporated before, like including things like swing speed, which was released this year as a new quantifiable metric that we can look at over on Baseball Savant, again, using StatCast data. So without further delay, we're going to get into these projections. So there's FanGraphs and there's FanGraphs WAR. And so I actually meant to read the difference between the two of those. So FanGraphs WAR just obviously uses their WAR projection, and then I don't know what exactly actually FanGraphs means otherwise. I think it's base runs or something like that, and so I really meant to look into this, and I apologize that I don't have the difference in front of me. I'll update you maybe on Twitter later after the show gets published. But by FanGraphs, this is their official projection. They have the Giants, drumroll please, finishing with 80.4 wins, 81.6 losses. So that, round that to 80 and 82, which is exactly what they finished at last year, with playoff odds of 26.6%. Now, one common thing I want to keep in mind here is looking at the other teams in the division along the way. So Dodgers projected by this system at 97.5 wins. So forget about them. But significantly, the Padres here by this projection only 1 win ahead of the Giants at 81.4. So I think some of you might have your heads spinning when you hear me say that. But when I look at the Padres, if you look at their roster, they've got good players at some positions, but they've also got these major holes at other positions, and they didn't do anything so far this offseason. So it's noteworthy to look at that. And then for the Diamondbacks, they're projected to be about 5 wins ahead of the Giants by this methodology. So moving on to FanGraphs WAR projections, It's a little worse for the Giants at 79.4 wins and 82.6 losses, with just 22.7% playoff odds. And once again, though, the Padres barely ahead of them at 81.8 wins. So that's 2.4 wins. And the Diamondbacks at 84 wins. And the Dodgers at 97.9. Moving on, though, things get better when we look at some of these other systems. And I use these like personally for like fantasy baseball. I play this kind of advanced type of fantasy baseball, and I use ATC. I use the Bat X. I've been using Oopsie, and like it helps me have success. This is not like an ad for these systems. I use them, and they're good. And so things get better when we get into some of these more sophisticated projection systems that typically, as far as I've seen in the past, have only been used for projecting like player performances. But of course, you can extrapolate player performance and turn it into win-loss records. And so ATC, again, that's the one that's averaging a lot of different projection systems, has the Giants at 81.1 wins, 80.9 losses with playoff odds of 28.5%. This one has the Giants just a little bit ahead of the Padres, who come in with 80.9 wins by this projection. So 0.2 wins ahead of the Padres, notably. And the Diamondbacks at 86.5 wins by this projection system. And again, the Dodgers 99. So seeing some consistency there with the Dodgers just miles ahead of everybody else in the division. No shock there. And also seeing consistency with the Giants and Padres around each other, which I think most people wouldn't expect. But we could look at their roster. I mean, I could point out the problems with the Padres roster and that they've just not spent money to address needs this offseason. It's not good if you're a Padres fan to look at that. But moving on, the Bat X. So this is one that I know for a fact uses StatCast data pretty heavily, and it's been one of the better individual projection systems out there for players. ATC is like one of the best because it's averaging them all, but the Bat X isn't averaging anybody else's. It just is its own system. And the Bat X has the Giants at 83 wins and 79 losses. So none of this, I'm not saying do cartwheels for 80, if the Giants were to go 83 and 79, but that comes with playoff odds of 46.3% according to this system, and the Padres projected by this system at 80.6 wins. So 2.4 behind the Giants. And this one has the Giants just 0.8 wins behind the Diamondbacks for second place in the division. It does matter. I just don't have time to get into all the other teams in the league for each of these different systems. But essentially, you're looking at a division winner, of course, in every league. Oh, and by the way, this one has the Dodgers at 96 wins. So we're seeing from 96 to 99 wins, like typically here for each of these for the Dodgers. And then somewhere in the 80 to 83 range, or 80 to 85 or 6 range for like the three teams in the middle, and then the Rockies at the bottom with like 60-something win projections. So anyway, let's get to this last one called Oopsie, which is a new projection system that has come out this year. And I think they use even more sophisticated StatCast data like swing speed. And it takes its name to kind of not take itself seriously. That's kind of the point of it, is to say when it's called Oopsie, which is to say like, it's going to make mistakes, and these are just projections, and the game is played on the field. So there's some of that there. But again, the Giants finishing third in the division by this system with 81.7 wins, 80.3 losses, and again ahead of the Padres, who project at 80.6 wins and 81.4 losses. And this one has the Giants playoff odds at 33.5%. And so I went ahead and looked at just kind of the range and the average being the mean and the median for the Giants using all these different systems. And coming up in just a minute, we'll go over those. And then I'll also talk about why I think this year is different when it comes to the projections for the Giants in a certain way that is different than in pretty much all of the most recent many years. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute and before we get into it. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like being at a huge game in person. The energy, the crowd, the atmosphere, it's unforgettable. I remember being at Levi's Stadium for a big matchup, and the roar of the faithful after a huge touchdown was electric. There's just something about being in the stadium that watching at home can't match. And with just days to go until the Super Bowl, there's still time to grab last-minute tickets, whether you're heading to the big game or catching a concert or NBA matchup in the meantime. That's where Game Time comes in. Their new feature, Game Time Picks, makes grabbing tickets easier than ever. It filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through a million options. I just used Game Time Picks to check out a recent playoff game actually in baseball. And let me tell you, the super deal option, insane value. I could see the exact view from my seat before I bought it, and the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, their on-time delivery and lowest price guarantee, total peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, here we go. We're going to get a little more into these projections. I know I was throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I do want to explain a little bit more about what projections are and why, to me, this year it's different. And then also, the situation is a little different for the Giants in terms of, I don't know, I'll explain what I mean. And then also the Giants made a trade that got even more interesting as I dug into it a little further. It's not a splashy one, but it's certainly an interesting one for a couple of different reasons, and we'll get into that as well. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. We'll be back tomorrow we got mailbag questions to get to. We've got the Giants made a minor league signing of a reliever that we'll get to. We're going to finally talk about Braxton Roxby, the player the Giants acquired for Taylor Rogers. So a lot more to get to as we're in the final couple days before the week that spring training starts. So anyway, I just want to give you the averages of these different projection systems. And, so let me just get to it. So I gave you a bunch of numbers, but the low number for wins was 79.5. The high number was just 83. At least this was as of yesterday. Sometimes they're running the models every day. The Mets just signed Pete Alonso, so that probably actually changed these numbers slightly. But as of February 5th, the low was 79.5. The high was 83.0, and the mean, the average, was 81.3, and the median was 81.4. So it's about as mid as it gets, with a pretty tight range between 79.5 and 83, with an average of just 81 plus a little bit. So, I wanted to say on Twitter, it doesn't get more SF and then cross it out and write mid. And so, yeah, that's notable. That just a projection of another very mediocre season. And also notably, it was 3 out of the 5 that had the Giants finishing ahead of the Padres, and those were ATC, the Bat X, and Oopsie. I feel kind of silly saying that name, Oopsie, but nonetheless, we continue. So the low, again, as of yesterday, was FanGraphs WAR in terms of playoff odds at 23.1%. The high was the Bat X at 45.7%, with a mean of 32.6% and a median of 31.4%. So notice in both, the mean and the median are about the same, with 81.35 wins and about 32% playoff odds. So about a 1 in 3 chance overall, if you average these all together, that the Giants make the playoffs is what these are saying. So I do feel like this year, though, things are a little bit different in that, first of all, I think the projections feel right to me. There's been not a lot, but some talk about they've taken steps backwards, but I don't really see it that way. I think, you bring in Adames, you lose Blake Snell, didn't really lose much else. You lost Michael Conforto, who weirdly the Dodgers were interested in and got and signed. But, I just think they're basically in the same spot they were last year. But the difference is they're going to give more opportunities to young players. It's like another year of development for a lot of key guys, a lot. And those players would be the difference between having a good season and making the playoffs or not, to me. I think they have a decently high floor because of players like Logan Webb and Patrick Bailey and Matt Chapman and Willy Adames. And so I don't see them being just terrible, which they haven't been since really like 2017, kind of maybe a little bit 2018, but yeah, 2018 wasn't so. I think they lost 90-something games in 2018, but 98 losses 2017. But they're not like that, and they've been very mediocre except for 2021 ever since. And this definitely could be more of the same, but I see upside for the first time in a while. And the upside that I see comes in the form of, the young players. And when I'm talking about young players, I'm talking about young/unproven with the likes of Tyler Fitzgerald, Heliot Ramos. Can they continue to build upon breakout seasons? Jung-Hoo Lee, there were high expectations for Jung-Hoo Lee coming into the 2024 season, and he basically barely played because he got hurt. And keep in mind, he's like 26 years old. It's not like he's a longtime veteran out of Korea. He's a young player himself and unproven. And if he can, they gave him over $100 million contract, so clearly had high expectations for him. So that would be huge if he could. It's just an unknown, and there's upside. And there's upside in Fitzgerald and Ramos. And then you look beyond that, and there's a lot more guys. Luis Matos, Marco Luciano, Casey Schmidt, Gerard Encarnacion, Kyle Harrison, Hayden Birdsong, Landon Roop, and even guys like Bryce Eldridge. I say even because I don't know if or when he would get called up this year. If he just tears it up in the minors, like they may just make room for him, who knows when. But all these players, like if they can get breakouts if they can get I don't want to say if this, if that, but there's a lot of guys with upside and potential that the point is that they don't have long track records, but they do have upside. So they could all fail. And then you're just kind of relying on your veteran players to give you a somewhat okay season, and there you go. But if you get, finally Luis Matos or Marco Luciano to break through like we saw out of Heliot Ramos finally last year, and then the young pitching like Kyle Harrison, it wasn't the best season for Harrison. Hayden Birdsong, we saw the potential there. Landon Roop finished the season exceptionally strong. So that's why I think that this year there's a little more upwards variance for the Giants. I guess it could go negative too, but I think the projections kind of build in tempered expectations for all of these players for the most part. And so to me, the ceiling is higher than usual with all these players who figure to play a lot. That's the thing too, is that I think they're going to let these guys play a lot. And I'm missing some names too. I mean, Tristan Beck, Mason Black, Carson Wisenhunt. I'm just kind of naming guys. There's a lot of guys. And you might say, oh, but the farm system ranks really poorly. But most of these guys don't get factored into their farm system rankings anymore. Fitzgerald, no. Ramos, no. Jung-Hoo Lee, no. Matos, no. Luciano, no. Schmidt, no. Encarnacion, no. Harrison, no. Birdsong at Roop, no. None of them. None of the guys that I listed as guys with upside and raising the ceiling are even considered prospects anymore, even though they're unproven. And so I'm not here saying, therefore, the Giants are going to win 95 games and win the World Series. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying they've got some young players who have upside, and those guys figure to play, and that it's been a while. Like, for a long time, this was a very, very veteran team, and the young, the minor league reinforcements were like years away. And finally, they're kind of here. And so there's the potential that these guys help elevate the Giants beyond these modest projections. And then I'm going to read a couple of little blurbs. FanGraphs writers took it upon themselves to like point out things about the Giants from these projections. So we'll read two little blurbs and then talk about a trade that the Giants made this morning in just a minute and before we get into it. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by our good friends over at none other than Prize Picks. Now, the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Travis Kelce on receiving yards and more for Patrick Mahomes' passing yardage. What I love most, fast, safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, here we go. We're going to read a couple of blurbs and then get into this trade that the Giants made this morning that I find compelling. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, 3 days a week for now. Back to every day, Monday through Friday, very soon as the baseball season, once the Super Bowl is over, which is very soon, it's baseball time. And so can't wait. But there were a couple of writers who took it upon themselves to point things out about the Giants based on these projections that came out. And the first one where did it go? 6 takeaways. Okay, I have it, but I'm just slightly confused by what my own organizational lack of skills, I guess. But one of the little blurbs was from Ben Clemens, who's kind of taken on the role of the head honcho over at FanGraphs, does a lot of their best work. It was from 6 takeaways from our 2025 playoff odds release, I should say. And what he wrote is here: our projections see the Giants as competent, bordering on good. I was surprised to see them so close to San Diego in playoff odds. And if you'll remember from up above, these base runs based odds don't take framing into account. So this is what I was saying in the beginning when I failed to read the article to fully understand which one was the base runs, based odds. And then he says, the Giants have the best receiver in baseball in Patrick Bailey, while the Padres alternate between 2 stone-handed options. I'm not surprised by the top, Dodgers, or bottom, Rockies, of the NL West, but the middle 3 are all intriguing in their own right. So, yeah, little shout out from Ben Clemens, who says he sees their projections see the Giants as competent, bordering on good. So, could make you upset to look at that and say, well, if you had done a little more this offseason, maybe you would actually be good instead of bordering on good. Feels like they've been bordering on good for a while. Feels like they've been just competent for a while. And I think another season of just meh is going to be very frustrating if it transpires. So the other little blurb is five teams that should confound their playoff odds by Michael Bowman of FanGraphs, also released yesterday. And it's the Giants, and he says when he's making predictions basically for over or under the playoff odds, and he says Giants over 80 wins and 0.9% World Series odds. Okay, give me those World Series predictions for the Giants, Michael Bowman. He says the Giants are my team for the most cowardly prediction out there, playoff sleeper. Apart from the NL Central, there are 5 National League playoff spots up for grabs. The Dodgers are a lock for 1, with the remaining 4 probably going to some combination of the Braves, Phillies, Mets, and Diamondbacks. If none of those teams faceplant, that leaves some interesting teams out in the cold. Padres won 93 games and took the Dodgers to the brink last year, but our playoff odds have them as an outsider, and I'm not inclined to disagree. Even beyond that, the National League strength up top leaves little room for a team that's poised to make the leap. So I'm going to make a bit of a, I don't even know how to say that, milquetoast? Sorry, I've never seen that word. Prediction that the Giants are going to be better than 500, wow, but struggle to make the playoffs, wow, unless someone else trips up. Like most of you, I'm mostly morbidly fascinated with Buster Posey's flying circus and expect it to end in disaster eventually, okay? But it's easy to forget that while half-cocked, ownership-influenced baseball ops appointments usually flame out in the long term, the immediate returns are often quite good. Everyone expected the White Sox to implode when Tony La Russa got hired as manager, right? And sure enough, they did, but not before Tony La Russa won a division title. I don't care about what the back half of the Matt Chapman contract looks like. I care that the Giants have a couple elite defensive players, a lineup of guys who can dump the ball in the gap. I don't quite know what dump the ball in the gap. Hopefully hit rockets in the gap, and solid pitching depth. Good enough to make the playoffs? Absolutely. And if they can move to Indianapolis in the next 6 weeks, absolutely. If they can move to Indianapolis in the next 6 weeks. Otherwise, they might need a little help. I have no idea what that reference is to. But anyway, just another kind of, I guess you could say, bullish take on the Giants. Just saying over 80, taking the over on the projections is what's happening here in a weird way. Also kind of being very negative, pessimistic about Buster Posey as president of baseball operations, but I get it with the inexperience. That's kind of the sabermetric point of view about Posey running the show. We'll see. Certainly some blunt comments there. But anyway, let's get to this trade. The Giants made a trade. They announced it themselves, so it's official. They acquired a player who was designated for assignment by the Tampa Bay Rays a few days ago, and that player's name is, it's hard to say, Osleivis Basabe. Osleivis Basabe. And yeah, so they acquired him for cash, and he is an infielder who can play short and is better suited at second and third. He makes a lot of contact, doesn't strike out a lot, graduated as a prospect, as the number 5 prospect in Tampa Bay's system in 2023. And he had recently been designated for assignment. Like I said, he's 24 years old. He has a minor league option. And so when you acquire a player who is just DFA'd, they go right onto your 40-man roster. And so the fact that he has a minor league option is very relevant because they don't have to roster him on the major league team to start the season. But to me, he's a guy who could break camp with the major league team, and it becomes somewhat of a competition for that, like Brett Wisely, Casey Schmidt, and now Basabe, like utility role guys who can play second, short, third. Like they need more of that, especially if Marco Luciano is not a shortstop anymore. So it's good to add a guy like this. And what I said on Twitter, I'll just kind of read it, that to me there was a kind of a concerning lack of moves like this over the offseason. They're not splashy moves, but when guys get hurt or underperform, you inevitably end up needing to call upon multiple layers of depth in your system. And then I said, case in point, Brett Wisely has appeared in 142 games for the Giants over the last 2 seasons. And in that time, he produced 0.1 FanGraphs wins above replacement and a 62 weighted runs created plus, meaning 38% below average offense, playing 142 games over 2 seasons. And so Basabe represents another option for that same role. And he's 24, has a minor league option. So does Brett Wisely. So does Casey Schmidt. So it just gives them a little bit more depth and a little bit more just another guy who's flexible in terms of being able to be optioned. So you can go with the hot hand. Whoever's performing can play instead of being forced to play someone like Wisely, even if he's not performing. So, and then also you deal with injuries, like say Matt Chapman or Willie Adames goes down. Like, what do you do in that situation? It's good to have, you need players, like you need guys who you can turn to. And as Marco Luciano moves out of the infield, I think adding another infielder like this, one with a minor league option, is big, actually. So it's not earth-shattering, but you need to make moves like this if you want to have success in a 162-game baseball season. So one of the other things, though, that I learned is that Basabe, instantly I was like, this is probably a player who's related to Luis Alexander Basabe, who played for the Giants organization in 2020 and 2021. And sure enough, that's his cousin. But also, Osleivis Basabe is the cousin of Luis Matos. So I have 2 thoughts. Number one, that's nice to have your cousin, potentially playing with you in the major leagues with Matos and Basabe now. That we could definitely see that happen for stretches of time, hopefully long stretches of time. Hope they both have great careers here. But the other thing is, like, it also kind of, I hate to say reeks of, but it also kind of smells of the old regime type of move where you're kind of maybe acquiring players because of reasons like that. However, I mean, this was a pretty decently highly regarded prospect, never a top prospect, but I have the full write-up. I just don't quite have time to read the whole thing. Maybe I'll post it on Twitter or X or read it tomorrow. But when he was last written about by the FanGraphs prospect team, it's a very interesting write-up. He has an over-aggressive approach and a high-effort swing, fantastic hand-eye coordination, and elite kind of zone contact rates, not a lot of power, boxer who beats you with nothing but jabs, passable at short, better at third and second, lightning quick transfer, sheer effort, acrobatic plays on defense, like he makes plays through sheer effort. And anyway, so not necessarily a difference maker, but potentially a good role player. And the Giants got him for cash. So that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. Today, for your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.